Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us for our January Clear Up the Chaos. I can't believe here we are in a new year. Time just flies by. And we just have so much to talk about still with the vaccine mandate. It continues to be our hot topic that we can't seem to get enough of. So I'm going to start right on time. I know we have a lot to cover, and I know your time is valuable. So I'm going to turn things over to Kevin Reynolds. He's the president of Ironwood Business Consulting. And I do want to remind each of you, as a client of NCW and Sanford and Tatum, you have complimentary access to Ironwood and their teams. So any questions that come up after this call, or if you have situations with an employee and COVID, feel free to reach out to me directly or reach out to Kevin and his team, and they will, I know, point you in the right direction. So with that being said, Kevin, I'm going to hand things off to you and start us off.
Outstanding. Thanks, Elizabeth. So today I'm remote, so I apologize for our location. And Christine is on the call also. She's my vice president and senior HR consultant, and she is going to wrap up the end of this Clear Up the Chaos meeting with some very recent updates as of today in regards to the Supreme Court. So what we're going to be talking about, it's all about OSHA and the ETS and the vaccine mandate still. So what we want to do is we want to recap kind of what's got us to this point. We've actually had from Elizabeth and a number of her clients asking for kind of key dates, when different key dates happen, different moments in time, when this is applicable, those kinds of things. So to kind of recap, the OSHA ETS came out on November 4th. Now, a lot of companies ask, well, does it apply to me? Is it based on 100 employees? Well, on November 4th, or any time since November 4th, if you were 100 employees as a company, not as a location, this ETS could apply to you. So if you were 101 employees on November 4th and decide on November 5th to lay off a couple employees, sorry, it's not going to fit. That's not going to keep you out of this. So anytime you're 100 or anytime you're 100 between November 4th and now. So that was the OSHA ETS. And then on November 5th, the Fifth Circuit heard a stay for a temporary stay for this OSHA ETS. The Fifth Circuit encompasses Texas and Louisiana. It's typically a more conservative circuit appeals court. So they basically on the 5th the case was put on temporary stay, and then the big revelation was they reaffirmed that ruling on November 12th, and that's where it paused the implementation of the ETS. And then on November 16th, whenever there's multiple lawsuits in these different circuit courts, a panel is put together, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roberts, oversees this panel, and they do a lottery type system, and then they assign all the cases, specifically the Fifth Circuit case, gets assigned to one of the circuits. And a lot of the conversation was, hopefully it doesn't get assigned for an employer perspective. Hopefully, for most employers, hopefully it didn't get assigned to the Ninth Circuit, because that was the California, Oregon, Washington, definitely a more liberal-based circuit court. Well, it ended up getting assigned to the Sixth Circuit, which was a very conservative circuit, which is, I believe, the Ohio area. So the Sixth Circuit was the one that was consolidating all these, won the lottery, was consolidating all these cases, and it was fully expected that the Sixth Circuit was going to rule in favor of employers and against employees, against OSHA. Well, on a very late Friday on December 17th, that actually the contrary happened. It was a 2-to-1 vote in favor of removing the Fifth Circuit stay and ruling in favor of OSHA. And that started this whole motion back into play. And I know we've had a number of Clear Up Chaoses where we think we're almost done, and then we get cycled back in. So I think December, we had another Clear Up the Chaos on this topic. So on December 17th, the Sixth Circuit ruled in favor of OSHA, and then that set into motion the lawsuits that moved to the Supreme Court. Well, originally the dates that OSHA had in place were in December and early January for implementation of ETS. And when when the Sixth Circuit ruled in favor of OSHA, OSHA basically changed their dates of implementation to be January 10th, Monday, and then February 9th. And we're going to talk about what those dates meant. So since the ETS is technically still moving forward based on the Sixth Circuit, Supreme Court hasn't ruled yet. Those dates technically are in place. So on December 22nd, Supreme Court took on the case. They basically agreed that they would move quicker than expected. And because they were expected to be in session on January 10th, instead, they held an early session to hear this case on Friday, just last Friday, January 7th. Supreme Court came back in to hear just this case and the case regarding similar related issues with the COVID ETS, the COVID mandate, vaccine mandate with the healthcare industry. So they actually heard two cases. But the first case was specifically this OSHA 100 employee mandate. Now that case, we all at Ironwood, we all listened into the actual Supreme Court arguments. It was a 3.5 hours long. Basically, OSHA, the Solicitor General for OSHA, her name was Elizabeth Prelogger. And then for the employers, keep it simple. For the employers, we had Scott Keller, which was from the National Federation of Independent Business, and the Solicitor General for the state of Ohio, Benjamin Flowers. He was remoting in. So they were the three that were on this case, speaking to the Supreme Court. Scott Keller and Solicitor General Flowers went first to make their case, make their claims. From there was a lot of interesting questions, and that's where the pundits get involved after this is all done. The pundits like to estimate what they think the vote's going to be based on the questions being asked. Now, the one thing we did find very interesting was there were a few very vocal justices that were in favor clearly for OSHA. Justice Breyer, Justice Kagan, and the news has been all about Justice Sotomayor and a lot of her statements that were a little factually inaccurate. But very clearly, they were in favor based on their questioning for OSHA. Justice Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, their questioning tended to lean more in favor of going against OSHA. So the pundits post this hearing, post these arguments on Friday, a lot of them are estimating that this was going to be a 6-3 in favor of going against OSHA. I'm going to try to keep it simple. Basically, putting the stay in place. Some have said 5-4 in favor of putting the stay in place and going against OSHA and going and voting for the employers, trying to go against this. But Chief Justice Roberts historically has swayed, has been one of the key votes. So Chief Justice Roberts, again, in this one, a lot of the pundits are saying could be the swaying vote either way, either the sway to implement this mandate or the sway to put a stay in place for it. So a lot of unknowns. We're supposed to hear, we have some updates on when we might hear. Christine has some thoughts on that. So what does this mean, basically? January 10th was Monday. So what are we supposed to do? So OSHA technically could start implementing and enforcing this mandate as of Monday. Now, OSHA is requiring a business to put into place everything but one component of this OSHA ETS mandate. That one component is if you are going to allow for vaccination and wearing a mask, testing and wearing a mask as an option, if you're going to allow as a business to allow that to occur within your workforce, you have to implement that vaccination program by February 9th. Now, OSHA is saying a business has to show good faith. What does that mean? Well, honestly, only OSHA can define what is a good faith implementation. So what OSHA is currently saying is between January 10th, being Monday, and February 9th, there has to be a good faith implementation of this ETS. But they could technically start enforcing as of Monday. The reality, and we deal with multiple OSHA investigations, probably 3 to 5 OSHA investigations a month. I do not expect OSHA to be enforcing this. I mean, that's just my professional opinion. OSHA does have the legal right to. I just don't see it. Now, after February 9th, or when this, if OSHA were to win the Supreme Court case, absolutely OSHA could. But from when we read that 550 plus page mandate that OSHA put out back in November, they have every intention of not showing up at doorsteps at this time period. They're not intending to show up between January and February, and they're really not intending to show up at your doorstep starting February 9th. Their every intention is to have the employees enforce this mandate on their behalf. And if you attended the previous Clear Up the Chaos, we talked about what does that mean. So to kind of recap that, OSHA is not large enough to enforce this mandate. So what they're going to do, and they fully expect, and it's probably already starting, is they're going to start receiving employee complaints. My employer is refusing this mandate. My employer is doing XYZ. So they're going to take all these complaints, and from those complaint letters they're going to receive, they're going to send off a letter to the employer. We've received a complaint that you're not following the OSHA ETS mandate. You're not following the regulations. You have 5 days to respond. That is the key moment as a business. You've got to make a key decision. Are you going to fight the fight, or are you going to comply? So if you decide that I'm going to tell OSHA to go pound sand, I'm not going to comply, they now have a document that says you're willfully violating a regulation, and then they're going to be showing up at your door. They're going to let the employee complaint and your response to that complaint be how they're going to choose who they're going to enforce these regulations with. So the expectations are going to be post-employee complaints. I know they're going to be accepting employee complaints. Sorry for background noise. They're going to be accepting employee complaints between January 10th, Monday, to all the way to February 9th, but really don't expect on-site enforcement till after February 9th. So, but we have to give you the kind of the expectations. So what are the things that are required between Monday, the 10th, and February 9th? We're making the assumption that we are not having we're not hearing a result from OSHA, from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has a number of different directions they can go. Let's just assume this process is still dragging out, because technically as of Monday, you have to start. So some of the requirements that should be in place, in fact, you should be moving this direction, is your company has to establish a vaccination policy that either requires that all employees are vaccinated, or, this is a big or, so all employees have to be vaccinated, or all employees that aren't vaccinated have to be tested weekly and wear a face covering. Now, that face covering technically is supposed to start as of Monday. But the vaccination and the proof of the testing and the proof of the testing doesn't technically, that requirement proof doesn't start to February 9th. Another thing is you're required to, if you're not on our newsletter, we have a great document. Another thing that you're required to do is, well, heck, Christine, I may need you to jump in. My document's not opening up on me.
Yep. So you've got to start January 10th with maintaining your employee records and your roster vaccination status. So yesterday you should have basically already been organizing yourself. So that's pretty critical. While the testing component doesn't begin till February 9th, beginning those interviews, asking your employees if they're vaccinated, getting a copy of their vaccination records, that compliance began yesterday. provide support for employee vaccination. So again, in that policy that Kevin mentioned, one of the requirements of the ETS was providing up to 4 hours of PTO to receive each dose. If you're getting the 2 doses, and then 1 4-hour block of PTO if you're getting the Johnson & Johnson 1-dose vaccine. And then reasonable sick leave. And remember, previous Clear Up the Chaos, we talked about reasonable sick leave. They define that in the ETS up to 2 paid days to recover from the side effects of each vaccine. And if you guys remember, the ETS really doesn't address boosters whatsoever. So we're only talking about those initial primary vaccines. Employees must notify employers if they have COVID-19 beginning yesterday. In a lot of ways, that's nothing new. A lot of employees have been notifying their employers because typically if they have COVID-19, they're experiencing symptoms and they were at home, like I am today, if you can't tell. I'm on day 3 right now, and I'm channeling my bass voice. And the ETS requires, as of yesterday, that employers remove COVID-19 positive employees from the workplace. And what that looks like is, telling the employee to go home, begin their isolation, and then also notifying your other staff that have had contact with that employee that they have been exposed to a possible COVID-19 case. Then unvaccinated employees have to begin wearing their face coverings yesterday, which we've talked about. Sorry, someone sharing.
Oh, sorry. I was going to share
The chart?
when you're done. The chart when you're done with that.
Okay, sounds great. You're also, as an employer, going to start providing employees with the ETS required information. And we can send that back out, but there is a list of information that employers need to provide to their employees to kick off the ETS. So it's their rights, it's various information about what does quarantine versus isolation mean, things of that nature. And then the reporting timelines, the new ones for OSHA relative to COVID-19 also started yesterday. And then again, we don't anticipate OSHA to begin knocking on doors, but could it happen? It could. And so starting yesterday, employers had the responsibility of having COVID-related records available within 4 hours of an OSHA or employer representative request. Now that request, as Kevin mentioned, could come in the form of a letter. But again, we're not expecting OSHA to be at your front door. And so we do have a chart of all this that speaks to the difference between the requirements that you need to comply with by January 10th versus February 9th. Kevin, did you want to dive into something else?
Yeah, can you see the screen? So if you guys are not signed up for our newsletter, we have provided basically every resource that you need to comply at no charge, basically every resource at no charge, based on if you're going to require your employees to mandate, you're going to mandate that they must be vaccinated, or you're going to go option 2, which would be if they're not vaccinated, they have to be tested and wear a face covering. So if you're not signed up or have access to this, please reach out to Elizabeth and we'll make sure you get this, because we're providing on top of that all the legal postings, all the notices, and we're constantly updating with new CDC guidance, which is where we're about to go next. Is CDC is really changing and stirring things up with some of their guidance. So this is a page that we created. I know Elizabeth has shared this quite often. So if you guys don't have it, very important that you get access to it. It's just too helpful not to. Now, CDC has been really changing things up for everyone. And what they have recently, as of about a week and a half ago, they came back with some different guidance that went from that 10-day stay at home if you have tested positive to, wait a minute, we're going to do a much shorter 5-day stay at home if you're asymptomatic. So what we created, and Elizabeth also has this chart to send off to you if you don't have it, is we created a chart that kind of goes through what is required under what circumstances. So right now, the new guidance, if you test positive for COVID, but you have no symptoms, the CDC guidance is only a 5-day stay-at-home quarantine. But if you're allowing that employee to come back to work after the 5-day quarantine, they do have to wear a mask for 5 days additionally. Just something to keep in mind. But this chart really goes into, okay, if you're symptomatic, if you're not symptomatic, if you've tested positive, if you have symptoms, if you're working, if your employee is living with someone that has COVID symptoms, there's a number of different guidelines and best practices and how to return those employees back to work. So please reach out to Elizabeth to get that information. Or if the information still seems to not quite fit your circumstance, that's why we have this relationship with NCW and Sanford Tatum. You get access to our HR professionals to help you navigate, okay, my situation's just a little bit different. We take those calls daily. There's pretty much nothing that we haven't heard. So we welcome those calls. So what I want to do is today we're trying not to go too long. We just want to focus on this. Before there's any questions, I want to say before we go to Christine on the most recent update as of today in the Supreme Court, I want to see, Elizabeth, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, I do have a couple questions, and I do want to just reiterate, I will be sending out the link to Ironwood's OSHA mandate page, and I do encourage you to check back regularly, because when things are changing, they're updating those forms, so everything is constantly being updated to reflect the newest development. So please do know that. So I will be, and I did share that in the chat box, the link, if you want to go ahead and access that. I will be including that in the follow-up email as well. I will be including the chart that Kevin just referenced, because that's great to put in your back pocket. And I do have a question that has come through. So let's address that question. And do remember, please, that you can send these questions via the chat box. So if someone qualifies for religious exemption and is not vaccinated, do they need to present weekly testing results?
Yes. Basically, if you're going down the vaccinated mandate requirement, OSHA was very specific in there that they do not expect more than 5% for religious or ADA accommodation exemptions to be granted within a business, because that's what they've seen for past issues. So they're not, if you have a business that all of a sudden has 50% religious exemptions, it's not going to pass the sniff test. To give you an idea how stringent the religious exemption has been in regards to like the military, I believe I read an article just recently that the Army has received something in excess of 28,000 religious exemption requests. And guess how many have been approved as of today? 0. So if you are going down that religious exemption path, that is where you need to be turning to our HR professionals, turning to Amanda, turning to Christine. That is a very delicate path to walk and should not be done without good guidance.
Thank you. The paid sick leave is only for vaccination side effects. It's not for positive COVID cases, correct?
Which is very, very interesting, because the government and OSHA were pro keeping these employees home and not hurting their wallet. Now, when the vaccine mandate came out, that switched. So as of September, so technically this year, you were not obligated to pay for a COVID PTO. Let's just use that term. If an employee is going home because they have COVID, they're off. Last year, as an employer, you're obligated to pay up to 80 hours of COVID PTO. Between January and September 30th, sorry, I'm 2022, so I'm going back up a hair. In 2020, you between April and December, you're required to pay for COVID PTO up to 80 hours. From 2021, from January 1st to September 30th, it was an optional. If you paid for the COVID PTO, you could continue to be reimbursed by the government. Now, from September 30th of last year till now, if you pay for COVID PTO, you do not get reimbursed by the government. So you do not have an obligation to do it, and you do not get paid back from the government for that COVID PTO. If there's anyone on this call that was not aware of that COVID PTO prior to September 30th of 2021, all the way back to April of 2020, if you were not aware that you get reimbursed for that money, please reach out. We've got people that can help navigate. That's a lot of money that people have left on the table. And I find a lot of businesses weren't aware about it.
So this employer, they have quite a few employees who work remote, but travel to other states for on-site work. Are these employees excluded, or are they included in the face covering testing requirement? Their current policy will not mandate vaccination.
So if you're not mandating vaccination, you're going down, be vaccinated or be tested weekly. There is, and we have that option 2 on our website that does have very specific guidelines. If you have a person that's at work at home and they are intending to report and work among others within like 7 days, there is a timeline, and we have every document there. I can't quote it off the top of my head. Christine might be able to quote it off the top of her head, but I believe it's within 7 days you have to get tested of going on. But regardless, that option 2 path covers every step that's needed to make sure there.
Thank you.
But the answer is yes, that they will have to be tested. Simple answer.
Yes. And really quickly, can you walk an employer through how to ask a vaccination status? I mean, what's the proper way of going about doing that with good etiquette, let's say? I mean, do you send an email? Is it something that you call someone in to your office and you have that discussion? What are the steps to take in that conversation?
I'm going to let Christine answer the bulk of that question, but it is confidential medical information. So you got to treat it as such. So if you're using emails, you got to be mindful of, are you protecting your servers? Right now, if the ETS goes into play, the record keeping requirement changes from 30 years post-employment for all COVID related records, goes into 6 months with the ETS, as long as the ETS is active when it comes to record keeping. But how to do that, I'm going to pass that off to Christine. And since I've got a hard break happening in 3 minutes, I'm going to let her take from here.
Thanks, Kevin, for your time.
Absolutely.
Bye.
So I would definitely encourage employers to take a very private and confidential approach. I would encourage face-to-face one-on-one meetings and use this opportunity to pass on additional information. This would be a good time to go over your policy with the employee, go over the notice requirements, provide them their employee rights document. And again, since the employee has to provide actual evidence of vaccination and it's just not a yes or no self identification, it would be an opportunity for them, the employee, to bring their vaccination record to that meeting. So you could go ahead and verify it, make a copy, and go ahead and officially include it in your COVID record. So I think the best approach is that one-on-one. It will be time consuming, but the reality is that this is a very sensitive topic and very diverse opinions. And so, being able to walk each employee through their questions, I think will be really important. And it goes a long way to your culture, speaking to how important this is to be respectful of their personal preferences and to afford them that time.
Thanks, Christine. So one other question that's come in: if the employee is choosing to go the option of weekly testing, how do they show the company the testing is taking place? Who approves or reviews the testing was completed as required? I believe this individual has been on other Clear Up the Chaos, and he has then sent back based on earlier conversation, does the employee have to conduct the weekly test in front of a leader?
Yep. So the ETS has a lot of options. Certainly, there's the option to tell your employees that they have to get testing outside of the workplace at a facility of their choosing, so long as they bring back evidence. And there is specific requirements of what that evidence is to contain and look like. For example, it has to have their name, what type of test was used, the actual results. Uh, let's see, I was going to pull that up, but I can send it back out to you guys. Might be the best approach to send a reminder of what that actual test result needs to look like. So that is one option. Again, the employer is not involved. It's very much an employee-driven process. Then the ETS allowed for employers to perform testing at their site. So that is something you can consider. Again, you would have to purchase tests. You would probably want to designate a couple of key staff to be the facilitator of those tests. Now, the employees can, sorry, I'm getting some echo. The employees can, sorry. Okay, the employees can self-administer that test in the presence of someone at the office. But again, that the employee is not allowed to self-administer and provide the verification. So it's not like they can go into the bathroom, take that test, and then come back out and say, oh, it was negative or positive. The expectation that ETS is that the employer would basically be the one then reviewing the actual results. So it's not that employers are expected to be the ones that stick that Q-tip up people's noses. Your employees can do that themselves, but to sit there and watch the results come up would be the responsibility of the employer. And to that point, I think it's really important to bring some awareness to testing. What we're hearing in the marketplace is that test kits are becoming challenging to come by. And we're hearing that directly from the medical community. I know of several doctors that are completely out of COVID test kits at this point. So if you're considering waiting for the Supreme Court to rule, and you're going to be an employer that provides the testing at your facility, we would recommend that you have your vendor and your test kit order basically already figured out and ready to pull the trigger should the Supreme Court come back and rule in OSHA's favor. Because we are hearing that there is a shortage of test kits, even though the ETS spoke to a whole entire section in their feasibility of the OSHA ETS about the availability of test kits. That's not what's happening in the marketplace. And we anticipate, should the Supreme Court rule in favor of OSHA, that the very next news topic is going to be the lack of test kits. And there's going to be a lot of stories about the Biden administration and the OSHA regulators being held accountable for lack of test kits. So that's something to monitor if this goes in favor of OSHA.
In regard to the asking, the HR representative should be the only one that is entitled to the information for their reporting. This information should not be shared in regard to the particular person asked with any other person, including bosses, correct?
Correct. I mean, so not every company is afforded an HR representative, right, at their facility. So I don't want to necessarily say that HR should be the only department that has this information or that is taking care of those interviews. It's going to be company decision. Now, if your company does have HR, is HR the best department? Likely so. They're accustomed to keeping medical information private already, so they should have those procedures in place. So by all means, we would encourage that the HR department be the source for that. But if you're a company that is not afforded that, then just designate who that's going to be at your organization, and then make sure that they get that training and education on how to keep medical records safe and separate.
Thank you. And then for companies under 25 employees, what records does that organization need to start keeping? What can they do to prepare?
Sure. So couple of points to that. So we're talking about small employers, anyone that has 99 employees or less. So whether it's 25 or 99, you're going to be in that small employer category. If you had read the OSHA ETS, like Kevin and I did, there was a definite theme and undercurrent about this is just the first ETS for employers, that they are soliciting questions from small businesses to see if they can comply should a small business ETS of similar requirements come out. So I came away from reading that large employer ETS fully anticipating, should that it go forward, that the next step for OSHA would be to issue a small employer ETS. So it would behoove small employers to prepare. With that in mind, you have to look at your various federal, state, and even local regulations, because if you are not under the OSHA ETS requirements and say you're a business in Texas, then the governor's most recent executive order about no company will allow vaccine mandates in my state would then take precedence. So you have some competing regulation there. And I'm in El Paso actually, and El Paso city and county even has more stringent regulations. So if you're a smaller employer, I would encourage you, one, to be prepared and understand all the facets of the large employer ETS requirements, because it's likely if it goes forward, OSHA is going to be coming for small employers next. Two, then get familiar with your local regulations. And if you need some help with that, please reach out to us, because we know it can be confusing and the information can be challenging to find, especially because it's so inconsistent across the states.
Thank you, Christine. And then one other question, does the 100 count of employees still go back to that November date, or did that date shift as well?
It still goes back to the November 4th date. It did not shift.
Okay. So do you have any additional things you want to add, Christine? I will be sending out, just a reminder, that chart. I'm going to be sending out the link. If you are not familiar with Ironwood's wonderful, I mean, it truly is a gift. It's things people, if you want something on a platter, they're giving it to you on a platter. I will be sending that link as well. And just a reminder that our Clear Up the Chaoses do take place the second Tuesday of every month. So our next Clear Up the Chaos is taking place Tuesday, February 8th. And I do encourage you to go ahead and add that to your calendar. And you're welcome to go ahead and sign up on NCW's website or Sanford and Tatum's website. And I will be sending, of course, the recording from this as well, if you have anyone else within your organization you want to share that with.
Sounds great. Let me give one quick update about the Supreme Court. If you're an HR geek like myself, this is all very fascinating, and this is your Super Bowl, if you will. So we are watching the Supreme Court constantly since Friday, and so much of what the Supreme Court is doing is very much out of their character, and that happened again yesterday. So on the Supreme Court's homepage, they have a calendar of, their argument days, their non-argument days, conference days, and things like that. Yesterday, they updated their calendar, and they put on their calendar this Thursday an opinion issuance day, and that's unusual. So there are some in the legal community that are already like, ooh, what does this mean? Just like it was for the Supreme Court to come back a day early on January 7th to hear the case, we kind of were hoping that we would hear something from the Supreme Court over the weekend. But now that the Supreme Court has scheduled this out of cycle, unusual opinion issuance day for this Thursday, we're all beginning to speculate in the community that we could hear on Thursday. Their typical opinion days are Tuesdays and Wednesdays and the third Monday of each sitting. But as hopeful as we are that we're going to hear something on Thursday, there are 25 cases that the Supreme Court back in 2021 still owes opinions on. So while we're speculating that Thursday's the day, we could fall flat. But the community is excited, thinking that Thursday is going to be the day that we hear something. So of course, if we do, we're going to be posting it and talking about it. But and of course, mainstream media will be reporting it should it get released. But Thursday is a day to be watching.
And Christine, I know if anything does transpire this week or even next week, y'all will be keeping me informed, and I can blast that out to everyone as well.
Definitely. That is it. I should add that even if this OSHA ETS goes away, and the stay is held by the Supreme Court, and perhaps it becomes a permanent stay, perhaps it becomes a temporary stay, OSHA still can look to COVID compliance under their general duty clause and under the National Emphasis Program of COVID-19. So we're hopeful that, you know, in one respect, as an employer advocate, that the OSHA ETS does get that stay. That doesn't mean that employers can wash their hands of all COVID obligations. So no matter what the news might be, keep in mind as employers, there are certain protocols and safeguarding you should be doing either way.
Christine, thanks so much for your time, and thank you everyone for attending. And if anything comes to mind between now and the end of the day or even this week, feel free to shoot me an email and I would be happy to help you. Wishing y'all a wonderful week. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Bye.